Greetings from the far side of the galaxy. I'm Fuuri, your host with the most with a brand new microphone. I'm still figuring some stuff out, so I'm sorry if I sound a little weird. Putting my brand new mic aside, today we're picking up where we left off with another Housamo Heroes video. Remember, I try to do these by popular request, so do comment whichever transient you want next. That's the only reason we're talking about today's Housamo hero after all. I'm thinking about doing a lead show video next, or well, I would be if Guilty Gear Strive didn't release its new character. Expect a video about her soon, but for now, let's get back to everyone's favorite gacha game. Why don't you go ahead, like, subscribe, and comment while I get onto today's Housamo hero, or should I say, Housamo heroes. That's right, today we're looking at the Kamada Crafter's Hellfire Craftsman and his ideal self, Hephaestus and Talos. Here's your obligatory spoiler warning for Chapter 9 and the virtual summer event. To start, Hephaestus' rule and role are unknown, but his sacred artifact are those internal flames. The flames burn away lies and misunderstandings, which lets him see the true nature of people and complex mechanics. Due to being able to see people's underlying intent and his past, which I'll get into later, he's got some quirks. And not the cool My Hero kind, he's got the uncool you need to go to therapy kind. He's quick to envy and jealousy, prone to not thinking straight, tries to do everything on his own, and oh yeah, he just generally hates himself too. He hates everything about himself to the point that in Tokyo he literally made a better robot version of himself. He would name this ideal version of himself Talos Idonikos. Despite giving his creation a name, he told it to go by Hephaestus despite the two of them being easy to tell apart. Hephaestus slouches and is marked with scars and a generally miserable attitude. On the other hand, Talos is strong and confident with none of the scars nor flames of a sacred artifact. Now that you can hopefully tell our two Housamo heroes apart, let's take a look at the real-life lore behind both characters. Beginning with Hephaestus, his backstory was basically lifted verbatim. There's two versions, but the myth's main point is that Hephaestus gets tossed out of Olympus by his father Zeus or his mother Hera. Depending on the version again, Hephaestus ends up on the island of Lemnos where he studied craftsmanship. Lifewonders opted to use Homer's account from the Homeric Hymn of Apollo, dude really named it after himself, huh? Where he's raised by Eurynome and Thetis. The mythical version did eventually make a return to Olympus by building Hera a throne she couldn't get out of. Dionysus eventually got Hephaestus to free her, and I suppose they let him stay so he didn't pull anything like that again. Just as in the game, Hephaestus did create Talos, but it was for different reasons in the myth. Rather than replacing a flawed self, Talos was commissioned by Zeus to protect Europa from kidnappers. Furthermore, they differ in that the mythical Talos was a humongous automaton made of solid bronze. It was said that Talos circled the island of Crete 3 times a day and threw boulders at any who dared pose a threat. I guess we can say Lifewonders took some liberal interpretations for the automaton. I would compare and contrast their real versions to their Housamo ones, but like, Hephaestus is basically the same and Talos is entirely different. The only inspiration I could find is that the mythical Hephaestus was the god of the forge, so the transient version is good at making stuff. Since I don't really have anything to add, I'll just move on to explaining the transient's backstory. The transient Hephaestus' story begins in his hierarchical homeworld of Olympus, where those at the top reign with absolute authority. He was actually supposed to be one of those that reigned, however his parents had other ideas. He was thrown into the sea where he was supposed to and would have died if not for Eurynome. Eurynome was a primordial titan of the sea and she raised him like he was her own child. Hephaestus only learned how to craft to make his mother gifts, but that wouldn't last as he returned to Olympus after Eurynome was exiled. That's where what we know of his in-game history ends before he gets transported to Tokyo where he joins the Kamada Crafters. At some point in the main quest timeline, Hephaestus had his memories returned by Tezcatlipoca. The memories were of him killing the player, who was the reincarnation of his mother Eurynome, which forced Hephaestus to make a plan. A plan that unfortunately involved a non-zero amount of kidnapping. You know the word, so say it with me. From here on out, you can see his actions for yourself in the main quest. Very appropriately for the god of craftsmanship, Hephaestus was first introduced in Chapter 10, Crafters. I think his introduction is one you'll remember since he does kidnap the player. It was well-intentioned, but like, kidnapping is still totally kidnapping. But that's not when the audience themselves are first introduced to Hephaestus or Talos. We're introduced to the both of them when Breek wakes up in his workshop. Hephaestus muses on Breek's nature before realizing that Tokyo will soon become a war zone and hurries Talos along. Talos meets the player first, saving them from luchadors before putting the napping and kidnapping with a trapdoor. Talos is there when the player wakes up and explains that he wants to keep them in the basement while Tokyo goes to war. He thinks that with him is the only place the player will surely be safe since Talos will be paralyzed if he ever tries to harm them. The player is having none of this and breaks free of their bonds using an early version of the Double Dragon. It is then that the real Hephaestus reveals himself. He then goes on to give us the most exposition since the early chapters of the game. He explains what dark matter is, blah blah blah, Tokyo destroying weapon, blah blah blah, saves the player when their rule goes berserk, blah blah blah, and finally after all of that exposition, when everything calms down, he and the player finally introduce themselves properly. No, wait, hang on, we get one last exposition as a flashback explaining why the player's sword is broken. And finally, he and Talos show up at the end of the chapter to save the day from Hombre Tigre, and thus concludes their role in the main quest so far. Good lord, people who have appeared in more chapters don't do nearly as much as this guy in one. Hephaestus and Talos are also in the virtual summer event, which I'll explain when we get to their units, which is right now. To start, Talos and Hephaestus share units, so despite having two Housamo heroes, we only have 3 units. Since he doesn't have a 4-star, his 3 and 5-star are very similar, with 3 being sword and 5 being spear. Granted, none of that really matters thanks to his first skill, which changes it to magic and has low odds of paralysis proc. I do like the magic change since debuff proc is per unit hit rather than being the same for the entire attack. The next skill is low proc for weakness and extra damage against mechmen, which to be honest, sucks. He then has low chances of giving crit to his left and right and a decent chance of giving glint. Glint sounds nice, but it's not that good when his debuffs will only reach 40% proc. His final skills are actually kinda good. Null debuff at 80% is pretty good, and remove buff at 40% isn't the best, but it's also not the worst. The 5-star lost the ability to remove buffs in exchange for CP at 90% and Stigma at 40% proc. How similar these units are ends up making the 5-star pretty bad considering it has 3-star skills and a 5-star cost. What teams do I recommend? Well, that's a good question. They're all-round units. Okay, well, not all-round the type, they're both fire, but all-round in the sense that they're very multi-purpose. He has good skills, but low proc, which kinda defeats the purpose of having those good skills in the first place, doesn't it? As mediocre as his skills may be, he can fit into a lot of teams because they're all generic, so go ahead and do that. Despite the 5-star being the worst to use, I actually really like its artwork. Rather than just sort of floating in whatever, this unit actually has a floor. In fact, I think it's one of the few that does. You can even see an image of Hef, or well, Talos on the monitor, and a photo of all the crafters on the desk. Moving on from his story units, let's take a look at his limited virtual summer event unit. Hephaestus and Talos are actually pretty important to the event, so I'll be skipping a lot with this explanation. I'll definitely talk about Yamasachi Hiko and Totohime at some point, so just sit tight. This unit is specifically from the end of the event where he and Talos dance to prevent the Dragon Castle from crumbling down. Oh wow, yeah, that makes no sense without context. Okay, to lay some groundwork, the entire virtual summer event unsurprisingly takes place in a virtual world. The major setting for this event is the Virtual Dragon Palace, where fighting is banned, so everyone has to play some very violent DDR. The unit itself is taken right from the end of the event where Hephaestus and Talos dance to keep the Virtual Dragon Palace from crashing. Okay, yeah, even with the explanation that sounds insane, so I'm just gonna move on to explaining the unit. The unit itself is a slash-type Aether 5-star with some pretty good skills to boot. His first skill gives him 100% proc for concentration, which is so damn good. He also has good odds to give Ardure to allies 1 square around himself and horizontal movement boost. When attacking, he has good chances to attract enemies in a massive 3x3 range and gives himself combo and extra CP. He then gets evasion at phase start, good proc for evasion after moving on turns by 2, and extra damage against mechs, cause why not? His final skill can deal charm, but who cares about that when he has great crit proc for himself but sadly not allies? It's like Life Wonders knew how bad they fucked up his first 5-star and made up for it by creating one of the best units in the game. Like, holy crap, this dude kicks so much ass, it's unreal. He's got good generic skills that can be slotted onto any team, making him so incredibly easy to use. The fact that he'll usually have concentration and crit on top of combo makes his damage output insane. Some of the only 5 stars I'd put above him are Hot Springs Horkyu and Nightglow's Kurogane, which says a lot. To keep this video short, I'll stop simping for now so we can finally move on to Hephaestus' relationship chart. Both Brick and Otohime like him since he fixed them both free of charge cause that's just the kind of guy he is. He likes Kagutsuchi and Ebisu because the 3 of them are children cast out by their heavenly parents. And of course, the mechanic likes the robotic R19. His guildmaster Kurogane dislikes him for reasons I'm not quite sure of. The one person he dislikes is Takemaru, probably because they disagree on what an ideal something is. Honestly, I was on the fence about Hephaestus when making this video, but by the end of it, I can say I like the guy. He's purposely written to be abrasive to underlie his genuinely kind and caring nature. His worst qualities are just there to contrast from the fact that he's genuinely one of the kindest people in Tokyo. For that, he gets the official Fuuri stamp of approval. And finally, before we go, he doesn't have any loading screens, so here's a fun fact. His charge skill's name, Talos Idonikos, is Greek for the ideal Talos. Be sure to like and subscribe and leave your recommendation for the next Housamo hero in the comments. I'm thinking about doing Licho next just to tie into the current event, or well, I would be if I didn't have a video about Baiken planned. As always, this is your host Fuuri signing out.